Okay. Any interesting plants that you see? What's this plant? But what's this plant first thing? Ginkgo. Yeah. It is. Yeah. So it's ginkgo biloba. It's also it's known as one of the fossil trees because it's one of the oldest sort of it's like a fern. It's one of the oldest species of plants, a genus of plants on the earth. And therefore, in I think the Chinese culture, yes, medicinal, and also if you have it in your backyard in your garden, it prolongs life because it's known associated with life. Chinese, it's named after some Chinese ginkgo. Yep, yep. That's ginkgo biloba, and you're absolutely right. It's a deciduous plant. And see what happens in a deciduous plant. The same. You see the chlorotic symptom, and also you will see the necrotic symptoms. Obviously, the reason why plants show is these symptoms is when the plant doesn't need as I say, it's using its intelligence, and so now it's storing the nutrients in the buds and the tissue for the following season. So the leaves, it doesn't need the leaves, and therefore it's not sending the nutrients into the leaves. And therefore all your plants, so-called deciduous plants, will start going yellow and orangey, and also a bit of necrotic symptom, and drop all the leaves. This is still, although a natural process, it's still a nutrient deficiency that's causing leaves go chlorotic and a bit of necrosis, and then also abscission of leaves. Basically, it's abscission of the whole, all of the leaves from a plant, leading to a deficiency symptom. So that's one of the ways to look at it, I suppose. But it's not a deficiency that you would want to treat, isn't it? You know that it's a natural process. This one here, what plant is this one? Yep. And what's the common name? Fiddle leaf. Yes. Well, you want to do it. Remove any damaged leaves. That's the way to maintain the health of the plant, and also to encourage new growth. So if there's anything that's looking damaged or diseased, you want to remove it so that if it's a disease, you prevent further spread of the disease, and also encourage new growth. Necrosis of the leaves could be. This plant is a potted plant, a larger sort of plant living in a small container. Unless it is fertilized on a regular interval, it will start showing symptoms. Now, you can see a bit of loss of greenness or light chlorotic symptoms on the younger leaves in this particular plant. And that is obviously as a result of the pot not being large enough. So as it's growing, it's not able to supply the nutrient that it particularly requires. And one of the symptoms that might start as chlorotic symptoms will lead to necrosis. And then if you look to the back, that becomes an entry point for diseases. So now you start seeing on the surface, you can start already, if you have a closer look, you start seeing some fungal infection, and you can confirm it by looking at the lower brown fungal spores. So basically inviting disease as well. So the relation between the nutrient deficiency and also the diseases as well. So your disorder eventually becoming a disease is another way to look at it. So that's your fiddle leaf. Then, guys, any other interesting symptoms you see?
What about the one behind you?
Yeah. So again, this is another ficus, and you start seeing a lot of the older leaves showing chlorotic symptom and also necrosis of the tips. So this is also a direct sort of indication of lack of macronutrients, which generally might have started with, or might generally start with lack of nitrogen, and then leading further to showing even to some extent a lot of potash symptom as well. You can see browning and becoming almost necrotic symptoms. And if you observe closely, it's mostly on the tips. And again, this is not just typically nutrient deficiency symptoms only. You start seeing certain fungal diseases as well. So it's just the nutrient deficiency that is inviting the fungal diseases, I suppose. And let's have some closer look.
Yep. Not very healthy, like this.
Any intervenal chlorosis? Now intervenal chlorosis, and then sometimes also the natural variation on your leaf.
What it is, and then what the product is.
The brand.
Yeah.
But then it's got the rate. It's got two rates. Application rate and the soil. Application rate.
Yeah, so like one of the ones I use is which is more of a phosphorus base. Yeah, that was
That one's a bit ugly, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not going very well. It's also very weird, isn't it? It really fats out in the stem. It's a strange looking one.
Yeah, it is. I think this opposite environment isn't very happy with plants like fungal. Too damp, isn't it?
Way too damp, very cold. And then they don't get a lot of sun, it seems. Especially now, because you only get a little bit when you middle of day and then it's so aggressive afternoon.
Fruit.
Yeah.
So you get these little.
The people in the food
What's an interesting fact about hydrangea in relation to pH? Yes, hydrangea is used by some gardeners as an indicator of soil pH. So going into alkaline, the flower goes on. All varieties, but most varieties would go into your female flower. So when you add a bluing agent, normally the iron sulfate to reduce pH. So the brand, the product comes as bluing agent to turn your pink flower to bluing blue flower.
People put rusty screws and stuff in there. That's sort of like old modern.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
It is freezing.
Not like some of these. There's a black one here.
So that's a disease. That's a typical disease symptom.
However, is that a fungal disease?
Yes, it is a fungal disease. See, fungal diseases normally circular, and bacterial disease are more irregular, like more hexagonal or rectangular shape. So that's a typical fungal disease. It obviously starts as a small, very, very small speck, and then you're not treating it, then it just, and then the condition here, it's shaded, it's humid, so it makes it worse. Now,
Yeah. Oh, it's a
really
breeding
bad.
ground here for fungus, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So the new growth which should appear like this, healthy growth should appear like this. Although it's lacking, you can see it's chlorotic, and you can see it's not green enough, but still it's a healthy leaf. So this is typical fungal symptom.
These are little secretaries.
Can I ask?
This one here, typically, one typical symptom you can already see is distortion of leaves. See how the leaves are not properly formed. So it's almost showing like curling of leaves. And then also you can see on the lower leaves more chlorophyll 100%. You can see the plant's not green enough. And then you got to observe where the chlorophyll is happening. Is it on the younger leaves? Probably not. The older, younger leaves still not green enough, but it's mainly on the older leaves. So one straight away telling us not having enough nitrogen. And then is there any necrosis? To conclude whether potash deficiency, maybe not so much. So nitrogen for sure, and then trace elements is lacking, which is leading to the distortion of leaves. And then we can look at the keys to see what sort of trace element causes distortion. For example, calcium. It causes a bit of necrotic. Now, should be calcium causing a bit of necrotic. There should be chlorotic symptom causing deformation.
There's a tiny bit of
I guess I
knock-off.
don't
No,
understand
Immature.
because I chose this one to repot with Steve. So he said repot it, feed it. So I gave it a general slow release fertilizer, but I also gave it a complete repot. And it did green it up a little bit
Yep.
in between, but it's still essentially. Is that too slow release response?
Slow release, yes, that's the problem with slow release. It lasts up to, feeds up to 6 months. It means it's releasing nutrients in very small quantities, and therefore, with deficiency symptoms, if it's a plant which requires sensing for whatever, for a display, for example, you need to fix the deficiency in a couple of weeks rather than waiting the whole season. Foliar application. Therefore, you see a lot of foliar application as the instant means to fix the deficiency
But are a lot of
symptoms.
the full
Yeah.
like high? So then would you have to go?
Yeah, I've seen them before as well.
I mean, what would you do?
A liquid fertilizer, a complete
Oh,
fertilizer.
you can get
Yes, and then I would apply. So liquid fertilizers are good because it's instantaneous. It's not slow release. So even in your roots, it'll be more instantaneous. Now the problem in a situation like here is the reason. It's so uncontrolled, irregulated, and we got a diverse selection of plants here. Some require more humidity and more water, as these plants don't like too much water. If they like water, it is in the root. It's a high feeding plant, it must be just in the root. So there's a lot of water that is going onto the leaves, into a small pot like this, and basically draining out and leaching out all the nutrients. If you were to fix this, it's normally a garden plant, not a nursery plant at this stage. It should be out in the full sun in a garden. And some of this discoloration obviously is also got to do with not getting enough light. If it is out in the garden and you're trying to fix it, instantaneously you would apply a complete liquid fertilizer.
How long does that need to be on the leaf before it?
Oh,
How long would it absorb?
well, a couple of days. I would give a couple of days. Obviously, the minute you apply, stomatas are opening and closing depending on the light and the temperature all the time. So it's through the stomatas in the leaf, it's absorbing. But obviously if it's going to rain the next day, most of it's going to get washed. So it takes few days for it to absorb the nutrients. But one of the main problems here is the lack of light and too much water.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
It shows in the plant.
Well, I've treated this one like 2 weeks ago, but I don't know what it is.
What plant it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's the one I put on it just to say that I treated it and what I treated it with. Not
I'm not
sure on
sure.
what it is.
How did you plant profile? Do you have to plant profile?
Yeah, that's what that was the
Well,
issue with it. So I thought I might have to end up. Paul didn't know either.
No.
I thought I was leaning, like I was looking at the branch, like the way it was structured. And I thought maybe a honeysuckle or something. And I'm like, the leaves look different.
Ah,
Yeah, as well as being more furry.
yeah.
Bit weird, eh?
The species I can tell it's tomentosa. Most of the furry leaves have tomentosa.
Yeah.
Species. Genus, I'm not sure.
So I just have to treat something else again. But it's looking better.
After you get, what sort of treatment you
I just did a general. I just did one. There was a lot more droopy, had a lot more yellowing, but with there's still a few leaves that are good.
The grey moss. I don't know, like some. These always look so crunchy.
I'm planning on it. So once it's, I thought that I know actually. I know where it's going. Yeah, so you get more light in the white.
It's
That's why figure out how the
Yep, and then obviously you need to tag it so that it's telling that you're treating it like somebody else.
So it's replacing the box today.
Yes, actually yes, because we already used 7, so we've got 2 more weeks to
Sanders. That was the one.
Exactly, and if you manage to change in a short period of time, you know? Yes, how to use it. Just a short time for you only have 5 years. So, it's not possible to see that change and make it see that change in a short period of time. So, whatever you've done in the past, whatever, make
I haven't done anything, but I know it's my highlight.
Yeah, well, it is.
This is distorted, yes. Now that's a distorted growth for sure. But obviously the variation
Hasn't really
is
got better.
normal
But then again,
variety.
it
But you can see a bit of necrotic symptom now.
Yeah, and it was lack of phosphate, I think. I wrote it down where it was.
Necrotic symptoms. Now this can be as a result of too much.
I think it's just missing a bit of nitrogen.
Or you know, light for a young plant. It's
I
light.
put it for otherwise it works.
Yeah, I was just looking at it.
So what are you doing?
This one is this because there's no disease, there's no pest. So what causes distortion of leaves? Calcium, so necrotic. You can see a bit of necrosis. You can see a bit of distortion. Distorting.
No, no.
Necrotic. So it's good.
Knowing
indicator
me, I
of
would.
the calcium lack.
So we're taking our plants to the classroom?
Well,
Oh no, just to the bench. Okay.
Oh, I can
Yeah, I think we're just doing them to the bench.
And so in that scenario, you'd probably say liquid calcium
I'll put a picture in
A fertilizer that has
and then followed up with that slow release.
yes, you could, and obviously, like I think one of you suggested, having repotting it because at the moment one problem is it doesn't have enough medium support. Even if you apply slow release or liquid, the volume of liquid fertilizer it can hold is so little. and then you get washed out very soon. So if you repot it into a larger pot, that potting mix would naturally have some calcium. And on top of that, you top it up with a liquid and some slow release, which will stay there for a while and fix the problem. Obviously, it will take months to fix the whole plant, but then that's the way to solve it long term.
And in terms of short internodes, can you see that on this?
Well, this is not hard to tell, I would say, but
How do you know when it should return? Just compare it to lower down on the plant?
yeah, I would say you would look at the plant, and generally when you have a couple of plants like so, and then you have, let's say, at the moment it's all uniform, so it's hard to showcase to you, but this is normal. You'd suddenly see a dwarf plant. So you typically see it in some gardens where the plant, or some nurseries where among all the plants you get a few plants which has got a different treatment, and therefore it would have been dwarfed. So these ones are normal, so it's hard to show you. But when we say shortened internode, it translates into the plant being stunted, smaller than the rest. Yeah. Normally, and the leaves are a bit clustered. So when the internodes are shortened, the leaves suddenly, instead of being equally spaced, they are clustered.
I find that very hard to get my head around deficiencies.
Yeah, and frankly speaking, there's not, like I was saying earlier, there's not much point for general